The Apache was very sadistic.
Anything to cause excruciating pain. And the more severe and vicious the torture, the better.
The only way you could describe her is not human. She was your Jeffrey Dahmer and all these people all wrapped up in one.
In the thick jungles of Vietnam, during one of the bloodiest wars in history, a name began to spread among American soldiers. It wasn't the name of a general or a powerful army. It was the name of a woman. A woman who didn't just fight, but made grown men tremble. She was known as Apache, and to those who faced her, she was more terrifying than death itself. How did a single woman earn such fear and respect in a war filled with firepower and chaos? What made her stand out so violently among thousands of fighters? Keep watching to find out. The woman they feared most. In the thick jungles of Vietnam, where danger waited behind every tree, there was one name that made even the bravest American soldiers tremble. They did not know her real name. They simply called her Apache. To them, she was not just another enemy fighter. She was something far worse. She was a ghost in the trees, a shadow who struck without warning, and then vanished. But more than that, Apache was feared because of how she treated the people she captured. Apache was not a regular soldier. She was a sniper and an interrogator who worked for the Viet Cong. She was known for her deadly aim and even deadlier cruelty. But that's not all. While most people fight a war with guns, Apache fought with fear. She used it like a weapon. She made it so strong that men who had survived gunfire and bombs would break down crying just by hearing that she might be nearby. Soldiers who had never even seen her told stories in hushed voices. They said she did not feel anything when she hurt people. They said she smiled when others screamed. They said she liked to take her time. She was not in a rush. She wanted people to be afraid of her, and it worked. Entire groups of soldiers would rather turn back and face the wild jungle than risk running into Apache. But how did one woman become so feared in a war filled with thousands of fighters? How did she rise through the ranks of the Viet Cong and earn such a terrifying name among her enemies? And what was it that made her do the things she did? To answer those questions, we have to go back in time. Back to when Apache was not yet the most terrifying woman in the Vietnam War, but just a girl in a country torn apart by years of conflict. Let's take a closer look at the world she came from and the war that helped shape her into a legend. Before she became the nightmare of American soldiers, Apache was just a young girl growing up in Vietnam. Her real name has been lost to history, but what is clear is that she was shaped by the world around her, a world full of pain, anger, and endless fighting. Vietnam in the 1940s and 50s was a country caught in the middle of powerful forces. First, it was ruled by the French. Then came a fight for freedom. The people wanted to take back their land. Families were split, homes were burned, villages were bombed. Apache would have grown up hearing the sound of gunshots and screams, not lullabies. She likely saw death before she could even understand what it meant. As she got older, the war did not stop. It changed. America came in, supporting the South, while fighters from the North, including the Viet Cong, pushed back. Apache must have watched as soldiers stormed through her village. She must have listened as her family and neighbors spoke in whispers, wondering when it would be their turn to run or hide. Maybe she lost someone she loved. Maybe she was forced to grow up much faster than a child should. For people like her, the war was not just something on the news or in stories. It was life. And in a life like that, emotions get hard. Smiles disappear. Hearts become stone. To survive, you have to stop feeling. Apache learned this quickly. She joined the Viet Cong not because she wanted to be a hero or a villain, but because war gave her no other choice. The Viet Cong welcomed people like her. They were fighting for what they believed was freedom. But not everyone fought the same way. Some chose guns, some chose bombs. Apache chose fear. The jungle became her home. The rifle became her voice. She was trained to shoot, to move quietly, to blend into the trees. But what set her apart was not just her skill. It was the way she handled prisoners. She didn't just fight her enemies, she broke them. She wanted them to remember her face, her voice, and her pain. And so, in a war full of blood and smoke, a young girl turned into a woman who would become one of the most feared figures in the entire conflict. She was no longer just a soldier. She was something more, something darker. Her story was only just beginning. Fear in the forest. Every soldier who stepped into the thick, dark forests of Vietnam felt something crawling under their skin. It was not just the heat or the insects. It was the feeling of being watched. Many believed the trees had eyes. And in some ways, they were right. Somewhere hidden in the shadows, Apache was waiting. Apache did not hunt in the way most soldiers did. She was silent. She was careful. She studied her enemies for hours, sometimes days, before making her move. American soldiers would patrol slowly through the jungle, their boots heavy in the mud, rifles in hand, and eyes scanning the thick trees. But even the most alert soldier could not see her coming. She was known to climb trees and hide among the branches, staying still for hours until she had the perfect shot. She knew how to blend in. Her dark clothes matched the forest, and her face was often covered with mud to hide the shine of her skin. Some said she could become part of the jungle. She moved without sound, and she waited without fear. The soldiers called her Apache because of her skill with a sniper rifle and her reputation for cruelty. But she was not given this name by accident. It came from whispered stories told by trembling soldiers in tents late at night. These stories painted her as a ghost, a shadow, a woman who never missed her target. They said she could shoot a man in the heart from far away and then disappear before anyone could even react. Sometimes, it was not the gunshots that scared the soldiers the most. It was what came after. If someone was caught alive, the fear grew worse. Apache was not only a sniper, she was an interrogator. And what she did to prisoners was beyond anything the young American men had ever imagined. Some survivors said she used sharp objects. Others spoke of slow pain, of screams that echoed through the jungle at night. But no one ever saw her face clearly. She always stayed in the dark. That mystery made her more terrifying. She was not just a fighter, she was a message, a warning. If you came into that part of the jungle, you might not leave the same. There was a soldier once, young and fresh from home. He said he saw her just for a second. She was watching from behind a tree, her eyes locked onto his. She didn't shoot him. She just looked. He ran back to camp, shaking, and begged never to go out again. His commander said it was nerves, but others believed him, because many had felt that same stare. To the Viet Cong, Apache was a proof of resistance. She used fear as a weapon, and it worked, because even the strongest men, armed with the best weapons, found themselves helpless when they thought she was near. She did not need an army. She only needed the forest, her rifle, and the fear that followed her name. By the time Apache's name spread through the camps, soldiers already knew what to expect if they were captured, or at least they thought they did. But no one truly understood what happened deep in the jungle, inside those hidden prison camps, until a few survivors came back alive. And when they spoke, their voices trembled. There was a Marine, older than most. He had been missing for several days before his unit found him. His body was bruised, his clothes torn, and his eyes looked far away, as if they were still stuck in that dark place. When he finally found the strength to talk, he said her name like it burned his tongue. Apache. He described her as calm, never shouting, never angry. She didn't need to scream. Her silence said enough. When she walked into the prison cell, the air changed. Even the other guards stayed quiet. She moved slowly, like she had all the time in the world. She would kneel beside the prisoner, hold their face, and ask questions in a soft voice. But when she didn't like the answers, things changed quickly. The Marine said it wasn't the pain that broke him. It was the way she watched. As an interrogator, she was cold and unshaken. She didn't punish for fun. She punished for purpose. Every cut, every strike, every moment was done with a reason. She was trying to get information, and she usually did. People talked, they cried, they begged, because everyone knew that the longer you stayed quiet, the worse it would get. Another man, barely 19, was rescued by his unit after being missing for a week. He had been tied to a tree, his hands swollen, unable to speak for days. When the medics treated him, they found markings on his body that were signs of deep wounds and burns. He had been questioned by Apache. He never gave her the answers she wanted, but he didn't have to. His friend did. The fear of watching someone else suffer was enough. There were other stories too. Stories of men tied down in the rain, left to shiver for hours while Apache stood nearby, waiting. Sometimes she didn't even touch them. She just stared. And that stare was worse than pain. It made grown men cry without a single word spoken. She knew exactly how far to go, never too far to kill. Just far enough to leave a scar that would never fade. She didn't care about numbers or battles. Her job was simple: break the enemy, and she did it well. But for all her cruelty, Apache was respected even by the ones who feared her, because they knew she believed in her cause. She wasn't a monster without purpose. She was fighting for what she thought was right, and that made her even more dangerous. No one ever saw her panic. No one ever saw her doubt. She moved with purpose, spoke with meaning, and left behind broken bodies and broken spirits. The prisoners who spoke, those lucky enough to return, never forgot her face, or her silence, or the cold in her eyes. They carried her memory like a shadow, always following, always whispering, and in every new soldier's ears, those whispers turned into warnings. The end of the war and the legacy. As the war in Vietnam drew to a close and the world's attention shifted away from the jungle battles and the pain they carried, Apache's role in the conflict became more of a legend than a reality. The media didn't capture her, and history didn't record her exact location. The full extent of her actions and her identity remained largely unknown. When the United States withdrew from Vietnam in 1973, Apache's name was whispered in both awe and fear. By then, the world had begun to move on from the horrors of war, but the memories of her interrogations and sniper attacks stayed fresh in the minds of those who had lived through them. The fear of her methods, the cold efficiency with which she carried out her work, kept soldiers awake at night long after the war was over. In the years that followed the war, some claimed that Apache had disappeared into the shadows, never to be heard from again. Others said she had been caught and executed, though no evidence of her death surfaced. The stories continued to circulate, but no one knew for certain what had become of the woman who had become a symbol of fear and power. According to an American soldier named Carlos Hathcock, Apache tortured American soldiers and others for information. After she got the information, she would let them bleed to death, which made her very feared. However, no one really knew who Apache was. Hathcock said he killed her in 1966, but no one could confirm her identity. Some people believe his story, but many others doubt it. A sociologist named Jerry Lemke doesn't think Apache was real. He believes that the story about her was made up to make Vietnamese women seem evil. Lemke also pointed out that women in the Viet Cong didn't usually fight in frontline combat, so the story about Apache being a sniper might not be true. He argued that the story was a way to make the Vietnamese people look worse and to make Americans feel better about their defeat in the war. Hathcock's story also described Apache in a way that some experts thought was strange. For example, he talked about how she looked and even described a moment when he and another soldier watched her while she went to the bathroom. This led some people to think that Hathcock's story was more about fear and embarrassment than it was about facts. Ugo Fracassa, another expert, said that the way Hathcock described Apache was very sexual and focused too much on her appearance. He suggested that it might have been a way to explain the anger and fear many soldiers felt, especially after the war didn't go as they expected. Some even think that the story of Apache was a way to explain the bad things American soldiers did to Vietnamese women during the war, as the story turned her into a symbol of cruelty. Even though many people question whether Apache was real, the story still became famous. It was turned into a TV show episode on the History Channel, and the character of Apache inspired a female sniper in the movie Full Metal Jacket. The story of Apache lived on in movies and shows, but no one ever knew for sure if she had ever existed. What was her true name? Was Apache even her real name? This question remained unanswered for years. Some believed she had been a local woman, born in the hills of northern Vietnam, while others speculated she might have been an outsider who had come to the country with a deep hatred for the American military. Either way, her actions told the story of a woman who would do anything to protect her people, a woman willing to sacrifice everything for what she believed in. But it wasn't just the American soldiers who feared her. Her fellow Viet Cong fighters looked at her with a mixture of respect. They knew she was one of the most effective tools in their arsenal. When Apache was in charge of an interrogation, no one dared question her authority. The prisoners knew better than to resist or lie to her, for doing so was a matter of life and death. And while her comrades in arms admired her, they also knew that she operated in a world where empathy had little place. To Apache, the goal was always the mission: survival, success, and victory for the Viet Cong cause. As the world moved into the 1980s and 1990s, those who survived the war began to tell their stories. And in those stories, Apache's legacy loomed large. The prisoners she had tortured, the soldiers she had killed, and the lives she had forever changed could not be erased from history. Her story was never celebrated in the way that other figures of war were. She didn't have the fanfare or recognition of the men who led the battle. But in the dark corners of the war's legacy, Apache remained a shadow, a proof of the lengths to which a person could go to protect their beliefs. And in the eyes of those who had been touched by her, her memory was both a warning and a show to the unforgiving nature of war. To this day, the exact truth of Apache's story remains elusive. Some say she was a ghost, a mythical figure invented by those who survived the war. Others argue she was a real person, her name lost to time, but her impact undeniable. A lot of the stories from the Vietnam War were told from the perspective of the soldiers who fought there. The soldiers in the American Army had been through a lot, and some of them wanted to explain their feelings. They talked about their fear, their anger, and their frustration. Some soldiers, like Carlos Hathcock, told stories about their fights with the enemy, but their stories were sometimes exaggerated. One thing that was often exaggerated was how dangerous the enemy was. Some stories made the enemy seem like monsters, like Apache. This made the soldiers feel better about the terrible things they had to do during the war. But it also made it harder for people to see the real people behind the enemy soldiers. The people in Vietnam were not all enemies. They were human beings, just like the American soldiers. Whatever the truth, one thing remains certain. Apache's name, like the war itself, will never be forgotten. What do you think about Apache's role in the Vietnam War? Do you think her fearsome reputation was a product of the times, or does it show us something deeper about the human will to survive? Let us know in the comments section. We hope you enjoyed watching this video. Remember to like, share it, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.